Every week we make hundreds, thousands of choices. And then if we're business owners, then you can multiply that by 10. It is exhausting to think how many choices that we need to make. And then, of course, there's the fear of making the wrong choice, which can debilitate us and then cause us to end up not making any choice, which means that life makes choices for us. So, in this week's episode of Weekly Momentum, what we're going to be doing is really diving into the idea of making choices, how we can line up with the right choices, how we can more importantly, handle the wrong choices and how we can create a compass that's going to guide us to make our decision making process even easier. So, join me in this week's episode as we dive into the power of choice. My daughter got a cat a couple weeks ago now. I told her, don't get a cat, enjoy your freedom. But she really wanted a cat. And so Stanley showed up. My husband's dear friend from childhood had passed away, and we just found out this week, and his celebration of life was on Friday. Earlier in the week, my daughter got sick. She had a fever of 104, and it was finals week for her, so it was a tricky week. She's away at school in San Diego, and of course, I was concerned about her. And then Stanley got sick. Stanley started throwing up. He ate an entire roll of toilet paper, and she was extremely concerned about him and took him to the vet. He needed emergency surgery, and she's really upset. So I was looking forward to on Friday a day to myself at the house, but then I started thinking, I'm guessing that my husband would really like me to go to the celebration of life for his friend with him in LA. And then my daughter's cat needed picking up from surgery because she had finals, she had work. She was an hour and a half away from where he was getting surgery. And so I made the choice to go ahead and be the one that picked up Stanley. We figured, what the hell? My husband and I would take him to the celebration of life in LA. Before we left, I had been for several days getting a hold of my doctor to get my medication. I'd skipped a couple of doses, and I wanted to make sure that I didn't fall behind too much on the medication. So that Friday morning, there was phone calls going on to both the pharmacy and to the doctor's office, trying to square things away. And in the end, it just boiled down to needing to go over there. So on the way to the whole Friday expedition, the first choice I made was that we would go to CVS and I would pick up my medication. And I'm waiting to get the medication, and I keep looking at my watch, which I then proceed to do a lot for the rest of that morning. And I keep looking, and the clock is ticking, and I'm sweating, and I'm looking at my watch, and I realize that we're going to be really tight getting to this celebration of life in LA. And I'm already regretting the choices that I've made so far that day. That regret, that guilt, when we make a wrong choice, that's debilitating, right? That feels so heavy on us. And so we leave the pharmacy, and I can see if we go to the vet, we have just a few minutes. And if I really gun it and get there, maybe I can make up a few extra minutes. We can get to the funeral right at 2 o'clock when it starts. So we get to the vet's, and I've made up some time. So I'm feeling pretty good. And we're waiting for them to discharge Stanley, and they are taking a long time. And I let them know we need to go to a funeral. And I don't want to be pushy because they've just been so great. And there's so many things that are weighing on the decisions and the choices and the things that are coming out of my mouth. And I'm looking at my watch, and the clock is ticking and it is moving. Now we've been there for 45 minutes, waiting for them to discharge Stanley. When they finally bring him out, they start to explain that the collar that is on him to protect him so he doesn't chew his stitches is really large, and they could put a smaller one on, but we need to go, so we just let them know it's fine. So we get in the car. Stanley's in the back. He seems to be doing okay. We're driving along. I'm driving. And my husband realized that collar is really big on Stanley. So then Kirk climbs into the back of the car while we're driving on the freeway, and he is searching around for a pair of scissors. Oh, I found one, he says. And then he opens up Stanley's cage, and he's trimming the collar down because the collar is massive. Stanley can hardly do anything. This plastic collar on this poor little cat is so huge. And so as he's doing that, he cuts his finger. So then I see him in my mirror sucking on parts of his hand because he's bleeding everywhere. And then he's shuffling around, finding a Band-Aid, putting the Band-Aid on. Then he's straddling, almost doing the splits, working his way back into the front seat. So now we're on the way and we're going to be an hour late for the funeral. And I am just feeling awful about the choices that I've made. I'm listing off the do-overs in my head as we're driving along and just hoping that there's going to be some miracle. So we get there, we're an hour late, we completely miss the entire service. We get back on the road to now drive Stanley to meet Sophie, my daughter, at work, which is in Carlsbad. So what do you do? How do you live life right now with all of these choices that need to be made? I'm going to start out with the do-over question. It is such a great way for you to give yourself peace of mind, for you to learn and grow from maybe the missteps that you've made, the challenges that you've faced, the wrong directions, or just the plain wrong choices that you've made. In weekly momentum, every week when you do the weekly rewind, you ask yourself the do-over question because the do-over question is something that you need practice with. The more you ask yourself the do-over question, the better you're going to get at answering it and being specific. You're going to be able to let the burden and the weight go a little bit of some of the bad choices that you made. The other tool that I want to mention is this idea of just dumping everything out, letting go of some of the choices that you've made in the past after you've done the do-over question, then to release the guilt, the shame, the frustration, the anger of a bad choice that you consider that you made. What if you write it down and you burn it? You give yourself an opportunity to move past it. Or as I was scrolling through social media this last week, it said there's a magic portal that opened. You can put all of your things that you want to get rid of in this portal. Well, what if you could put all of your bad choices into a portal, have them sucked up and taken away, and you could have a clean slate? I want you to think in terms of releasing the choices that you've made that maybe you have regret around as we step not only into this week, but if you're watching this in real time, we're getting ready to step into a new year. And so this is a really good time for you to give yourself permission to release, to let go of some of the choices that you made in the past. Let's take all of this choice stuff that we're chewing on. And let's now move into the weekly momentum process. And as a reminder, there's 4 steps to the weekly momentum process. Step 1 is to rewind. Step 2 is to realign, line ourselves back up with our true north, with what's important. Step 3 is to go ahead and plan the next week. And step 4 is to go ahead and plug in. So in step 1, rewind. Well, it's pretty obvious here. Use that do-over question. And I encourage you, yes, do over the last week. Really acknowledge the amount of choices that you made in the last week. Give yourself credit for the good choices that you made. And then lean into the do-over questions and look at the choices that you could have made differently. When we do the do-over question, it doesn't mean we did anything wrong. Making a bad choice doesn't mean we did something wrong. We did the best with the information we had in that moment. But the do-over question gives us a new opportunity, a chance to figure out how we could choose differently in the future. And so, especially as we look at choices this week in this episode, I want you to give yourself permission to do over some of the choices that you made this week. Could be little things, whether or not you stopped at the pharmacy and made yourself late. Could be big things, whether or not you attended an event or said something to someone. Sometimes a do-over is that we said something we wish we could take back. Sometimes a do-over is that we didn't say something that we felt we should have said in the moment. Give yourself an opportunity right now to rewind the last week and to look at the do-over question, to give you a second chance for your choices and to release the regret that you feel around some of the choices you made that you're not satisfied with. Take a breath. After you've done that, let's move into step 2. Realign. I mentioned at the beginning, it is a lot easier to make good choices that we feel confident around and that we don't have regret with if we have true north. We understand what our priorities are. And what that really boils down to is having a plan. I'm a huge fan of plans. I didn't always have them, but once I found them, it became like a security blanket for me. A lot of people feel like it takes away your freedom or it doesn't allow for enough creativity to have a plan. But for me, the whole planning process is creative. It is freedom. It is possibility. It is vision. And I look at my 90-day and my annual plan and use it as my true north. And so as we step into this next week in step 2 and we realign, what you're realigning with is your true north. You're reminding yourself what is important to you, whether you're looking back at goals you have for the year, maybe bigger goals that you have for your lifetime, or maybe goals for the next 90 days. I want you to remind yourself every single week, what is your true north? What is important? So that then you're not feeling such a tug of war when you have to choose between your husband and your daughter and a sick animal and your work and your peace of mind. Everything's going to be pulling at you as you step into this week. But knowing what your true north is, knowing where you're heading, knowing what you can say no to and what you want to say yes to, what the priority is, what the order is, what comes first, realigning with that every single week will help you make better choices as you step into the next week. And as I'm talking about that right now, I hope that you have these plans in place. If you don't, make your goal this week that you're going to be working on getting really clear about what is your true north, what is important to you. And if you need help with that, I've created a program called Your Breakthrough Year. I'm going to drop a link to it in the description below, along with a link to a video, which when you sign up to watch that video, it's going to give you a limited time $100 discount on the program. So I'm going to drop that below. If you don't know what your true north is, if you're struggling to prioritize or make choices, if you don't have a format for creating a plan, especially for the year ahead, then check out Your Breakthrough Year. It's going to walk you step by step at your own pace through that strategic annual planning process for your entire life. So many times we have a plan maybe for our business, but we don't take into consideration our entire life. My Your Breakthrough Year program is a full 360-degree planning process that takes into account all of your 12 life areas and helps you prioritize and get really clear on what's important. Step 3 is where you create a plan for the week. Once again, this is so much easier to do when you know what the bigger picture is. So once you've gone through your breakthrough year, once you have your annual roadmap, that plan for the year ahead, you can then use that to help you plan the week. If you don't have a bigger vision, what ends up happening when you plan each week is you plan and then maybe even accomplish everything on the plan, but you'll notice you're spinning in circles, you're not really getting anywhere. You're busy, you're productive, checking things off the list, but it's just taking you 3 feet in one direction, 2 feet in the other direction, 5 feet backwards. You're just spinning around. You need the bigger goals like your annual plan and your 90-day plan to pull you forward so you actually make progress. So in this planning step of weekly momentum, or if you're feeling like you're struggling to plan, or if you're feeling overwhelmed and really struggling to make choices, probably because you need to have a bigger goal, a bigger vision that you're invested in. And I strongly encourage you to create an annual plan. As you're making choices, simple things can help us make a better plan. Like, for example, in weekly momentum, one of the things that I do is I gamify the planning process. I make it so that you're picking 10 things. You have a weekly top 10. The reason I do that is because we only have so much bandwidth. And so when you limit the amount of things that you're going to do this week, instead of having this never ending to do list, you're preempting some of the choices that you might have to make during the week. You're making them when you have a clear mind at the beginning of the week, rather than when you're overwhelmed, stressed out, and emotional later in the week and perhaps making a bad decision. Every week we have more than 10 things to do. Let's be completely honest with ourselves. But the reason I set up weekly momentum the way that I do is because there is a weekly top 10. We're going to have to pick 10 things that we're going to focus on this week when we write it in the weekly top 10. What that does is it gives you the power of choice at the beginning of the week when your mind is fresh, you're looking clearly at the whole picture, and you're able to step back and make a better choice. If instead you have a never-ending to-do list every single week, what happens is your choices are going to be made for you in the moment as you're going through the week. And what's going to happen is at the end of the week, not everything's going to get done, but you didn't really make a clear choice about why or when you chose what to do and what not to do. So that's why I set up weekly momentum the way that I do. It takes a few minutes. It's an extra step to make the choice. What I want you to think about is, how am I picking? What am I using as the criteria to choose what I'm going to do this week? Start to get familiar with what your true north is. Start to understand your process of choosing this or this. In moments when you're not in an emotional dilemma or there's not that time scarcity, I want you to notice your choice making process so that you can get better at making choices and make more choices ahead of time so that you're not waiting until you're stressed out, there's no time, and you're being emotionally driven. The other thing that happens if we just have a really long to-do list or we choose not to make choices is we become the victim. We are just floating around, allowing everybody else to make choices or everybody else's priorities to make choices for us instead of making choices for ourselves. And then there can be a lot of anger that can show up, a lot of frustration. We can float around feeling like a victim, like we have no power of choice in our life. When we make choices clearly at the beginning of every week, we're stepping into the week as a hero, not as a victim. So I encourage you, stick to your weekly top 10. And I even more encourage you, have 7 of them be things to do. And maybe you even have 3 things on your weekly top 10 that are not to-dos. That's another amazing way to exercise your power of choice so that you can get better at creating the space and making choices when you're clear-headed. Finally, step 4 of the weekly momentum process, that's when you plug in. That's when you look at the choices you've made of what you're going to do that week. And instead of just presuming everything will work out and everything will be great, you have a hand in it going well. You take the time to plot out when will you do these things. For me, it's not just about time blocking. For each of the items on the weekly top 10, I want to step through it. I want to do a mental rehearsal so that I can work out the bugs a little bit right then and there at the beginning of the week, rather than hitting the roadblocks so many times as I'm going through the week. So when you do the weekly momentum process, what you're doing is you're putting yourself in such a great position to make choices on your terms when you're in a clear-minded, spacious, good-feeling place. So we've gone through all 4 steps of the weekly momentum process. And we've really looked at this idea of choice in our life. Sometimes we can feel like we don't have any choice. We can feel overwhelmed by that. We can feel hopeless by that. but just noticing small things that you have choices about if you're feeling overwhelmed is going to build up your emotional bank account. Just choosing what you're going to eat, what you're going to drink, what time you're going to get up in the morning. These are choices that you can make for yourself. You do have so many choices, even when you feel like you don't. And I encourage you as you step through this week to notice some of the choice points that you come to and notice how you're navigating your way through them. Remember, you've got tools to help you. You've got the do-over question. You've got the magic portal or a piece of paper that you can burn so you can release some of the choices that you made that you want to let go of. And you have the opportunity with weekly momentum to put yourself in a position to make choices with a clear mind. Thanks so much for tuning in, and I'll see you in next week's episode of Weekly Momentum.